part of the human experience. That deep-seated sense of agency, of selfhood, of making decisions that genuinely shape your world.
We sort of navigate life with this internal compass, often without even a second thought.
Right. But what if that I, that feeling of being the one in control, isn't quite as simple or as independent as it feels?
That's the big question.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into some of the most profound, really enduring questions surrounding free will, agency, and the very nature of the self.
And it gets really compelling here.
It does, because these aren't just modern Western concerns, what we often think of as, contemporary philosophical dilemmas.
Yeah.
Well, they've been grappled with for millennia.
Millennia, yeah. By thinkers in classical Indian philosophical traditions.
And often from starting points you might find surprisingly different from our own typical frameworks. Our journey today is guided by a truly fascinating scholarly volume. It's titled Free Will, Agency, and Selfhood in Indian Philosophy, edited by Matthew R. Dasti and Edwin F. Bryant.
A fantastic resource.
It really is. This book compiles insights from such a vibrant array of schools, and each one offers a unique lens on these timeless questions.
And our mission today really is to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from this incredibly rich material for you, the curious learner.
Right. We're aiming for those aha moments.
Exactly. A shortcut, sort of, to being well-informed without feeling completely overwhelmed by, information overload. We'll explore how diverse schools within Indian philosophy traditions like Sāṃkhya, Nyāya, Buddhism, Jainism, Mīmāṃsā, Advaita, Vedānta,
Kashmiri Shaivism, Madhva, Gachi Vaitava.
the list goes on.
It does. How they approach these concepts, and it's important to remember they didn't do this in isolation.
No.
They were often in vibrant debate with each other, constantly refining their positions in this really dynamic intellectual landscape. So we'll be asking, what did agency truly mean in these contexts? How did free will intersect with powerful concepts like karma, or maybe divine will?
And what exactly is this self that is supposed to be free and act? It's a complex tapestry, really.
It is, and we're here to help you navigate its intricate threads.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with a foundational term, agency. Our source defines it quite simply as the capacity to perform actions.
Simple but deep.
Right. And to really grasp the nuance, it offers a great analogy. Imagine a stone rolling down a hill and splashing into a stream.
Okay.
It's certainly entering into causal relations. It produces effects like splashing water, ripples.
Sure, physical cause and effect.
But these aren't considered actions proper in the philosophical sense. They're just events, really. The predictable outcome of physical forces.
Right, no intention there.
Exactly. Now, compare that to you jumping into a stream on a hot summer day to cool down. That is an action.
Ah, okay. Because you are its source.
You're the initiator of that specific intentional movement. This capacity, that sense of being the origin of an action, is neatly captured by the Sanskrit term kartva.
Kartva.
Got it. But this basic definition immediately opens up a fascinating debate, doesn't it? Does agency require what our source calls a robust capacity for reflection and choice, the kind we usually associate with humans?
Or could it be broader?
Right. As some Western philosophers like Frankfurt and Vellman, mentioned in the source, have argued. Could agency extend beyond humans? Could a spider, for instance, weaving this intricate web with seeming purpose, could that be considered an agent?
It's a tricky one.
It is. Our source doesn't aim to settle that big question. Instead, the editors say they are most interested in the way that agency is manifested by rational agents.
Okay, focusing on humans then, primarily.
Primarily, where human beings intentionally produce selected outcomes that align with their values and desires. And this specific manifestation implies both ownership of your actions, that sense of I did that, and a distinct responsibility for your choices, your behaviors.
So it's about that deep, intentional I's acting in the world.
Exactly. The I that feels a sense of volition.
Okay. If we connect this to the broader intellectual environment, classical Indian thinkers, they inherited a truly distinctive problem space when they approached these questions. They weren't starting from a blank slate.
Right, there was existing context.
Definitely. And one of the most significant early influences, certainly a formidable shadow of determinism, came from the Ajivika school.
Ajivika, right.
Its luminary, Macaulay Gosala, famously argued that human effort is useless. Fate rules the lives of all.
Wow, quite deterministic.
Extremely. For him, Our lot in life was simply to accept destiny, to experience whatever suffering or enjoyment was pre-allotted. There was no real scope for individual will to alter the course.
Just accept it.
Just accept it. But this view, well, it faced vigorous condemnation.
From whom?
From two of his major contemporaries, the Buddha and Mahavira, the Jaina luminary. Both of them extolled personal effort. They asserted its crucial role in the pursuit of, the supreme good, liberation.
So a direct counter-argument.
A very strong one. And alongside this, you have the Upanishadic sages developing the profound doctrine of karma.
Ah, karma. Central to so much Indian thought.
Absolutely. Which posited that one's decisions, one's actions, create a sort of momentum that extends not just through one's current life, but across multiple embodiments. It has consequences that unfold over lifetimes, shaping your future circumstances.
So actions have long-lasting effects.
Very long-lasting. Now, the classical philosophers largely accepted this idea that one's karmic inheritance determined the range of options available in the current life.
Okay, so karma sets the stage, in a way.
Exactly. But the debate then shifted dramatically. It became about articulating the role of human effort in light of both the causal weight of the past and the complicated set of current relationships that impinge upon individual agency.
So it wasn't if karma exists.
No, more about how we still act, how we exert agency within its powerful, maybe predetermined framework. How much wiggle room do we actually have?
Right. And this is where the philosophical rubber truly meets the road, isn't it? These schools of thought, the Darshanas.
Yes, the Darshanas.
They weren't isolated intellectual silos. Far from it. They were in constant dynamic dialogue. You could almost think of it as an intellectual boxing match.
That's a good way to put it. Philosophical development often involved intense inter-school debate, mutually inspired refinement unfolding across generations of commentators, respondents.
So they were building on each other's ideas, even through disagreement.
Absolutely. An individual darshana's arguments and positions, in fact, can often only be fully understood in relation to its disputants, its purvapahins.
The opponents, right.
Exactly. This constant critique and response sharpened each tradition's unique stance on agency and the self. And we'll see this play out vividly as we go deeper into their specific views.
It sounds like a fascinating intellectual arena. Each contender honing their arguments against the best of their opponents.
Leading to some incredibly sophisticated ideas.
Okay, maybe before we dive into the Indian school specifically, could you give us a quick grounding, some Western philosophical touch points for comparison, just briefly?
Sure, absolutely. Though it's crucial, as you said, to remember these arose from distinct historical contexts, different problem spaces.
Right.
In ancient Greece, you had thinkers like Plato and Aristotle. They were deeply concerned with autonomy, robust agency. Plato, for instance, argued that true autonomy required reflective knowledge of what is good and rational control over one's desires and actions.
So self-mastery was key.
Very much so. He even suggested that politically powerful individuals, if they were slaves to their passions, were in a deeper sense powerless, lacking true self-governance.
Interesting.
And Aristotle, following this, identified specific conditions that could impair or undermine an individual's autonomy, highlighting when the origin of action might be external rather than internal. The central question for them was, really, what allows a person to truly be their own master?
Okay, so the ancients focused on rational control. What about the medieval period?
Moving into the medieval period, concerns about free will typically arose from, well, theological reflection. Augustine, for example, grappled with the problem of assigning responsibility for the fall of Adam and Eve.
The problem of evil, essentially.
Right. His solution was to ground it in human free will, a gift from God, which thereby absolved God from being the direct cause of their disobedience.
But then there's God's omniscience, right, if God knows everything.
Exactly. The problem deepened. If God already knows the future, how can our choices be truly free? Boethius, and later Aquinas, tackled this by situating God outside of time.
Outside of time, how does that work?
Well, the idea is our free choices occur within time, but God's knowledge isn't foreknowledge in a temporal sense. It's a simultaneous, temporal awareness of all reality.
Ah, I see, like seeing the whole timeline at once.
Kind of. And Aquinas further developed the idea of the will as a rational appetite, a motivation for goal-directed action informed by intellect. Here, the emphasis was often on aligning human will with divine will.
Okay, and then the modern era.
In the modern Western era, the focus shifted. It moved away from divine will towards the forces of nature, scientific determinism. Hobbes, for instance, influentially argued that freedom simply meant a lack of physical impediments for physical bodies.
So just physical freedom of movement.
Pretty much. For him, it was incoherent to speak of a free will for humans in any deeper metaphysical sense. Spinoza, another determinist, proposed that true freedom lay in accepting our complete embeddedness within the network of relationships that comprise this deterministic universe, finding liberation in understanding necessity.
Accepting determinism as freedom.
For Spinoza, yes, understanding your place in the causal web. And then Kant, famously, offered a dualistic solution.
How so?
He conceded the phenomenal world, the world of scientific observation to scientific determinism, while positing the possibility of free will in the noumenal realm, a realm of things in themselves, beyond empirical experience.
Two realms, okay.
So while the questions resonate across cultures, you can see the foundational assumptions and proposed solutions are quite distinct. It sets the stage for very different perspectives on agency in India.
Absolutely. Okay, let's plunge into those core debates within Indian philosophy now, starting with Sāṃkhya Yoga. You mentioned it's arguably the oldest speculative philosophical tradition in ancient India.
That's right. And their core axiom is, well, uncompromising. If something is eternal, that thing cannot change.
Eternal means unchanging. Okay.
This principle leads them to a truly fascinating and, for some, quite problematic dualism. They divide all reality into two fundamentally distinct categories.
Two categories?
Yes. At one pole, you have the Atman, also known as Puru. This is the deep self. It's described as conscious, eternal, and utterly changeless.
The pure self.
Pure self, exactly. A pure quantum of consciousness, you might say. Awareness without content, and crucially, a non-agent, or a kartavava.
A non-agent, so the self doesn't act.
According to Sāṃkhya, no. The Puru is conceived as a witness, saikva, autonomous kaivalya, indifferent madhyastya, and a pure seer, dvaitva. But here's the absolute key point. There are no psychic functions inherent in the Atman. It simply is consciousness. It doesn't think, feel, or act.
Wow, okay, so if the self is pure consciousness, what's the other pole?
The other pole is prakriti. This is unconscious matter. It underpins the entire physical, changing world as we experience it. And all those fluctuating features of personhood that we typically associate with ourselves, things like agency, desire, our thoughts, emotions, all our propositionally structured cognition, all of these are relegated to the subtle but inert material, the protected coverings that envelop the Atman.
So agency, desire, they belong to matter, not the self.
Exactly. These coverings aren't just one undifferentiated mass either. They have distinct functions. They include buddhi, your discerning intellect, which makes decisions and understands.
The intellect.
Ahakara, the ego, or the I-maker, which takes ownership and creates the sense of individuality.
The ego.
And manas, the mind, which processes sense data, forms intentions, manages thoughts.
Mind, ego, intellect. All parts of prakriti, of matter.
Correct. All inert, ultimately unconscious matter, just organized in subtle ways.
So this presents a fundamental dilemma for Sāṃkhya and, well, for us trying to understand it. Who, or what then, in this type of dualistic metaphysics foundational to Sāṃkhya and yoga, is the agent of action?
Right. If the Atman is eternal and changeless, it can't be involved in the temporal, fluctuating act of agency.
So what's the answer?
Sāṃkhya's answer is quite clear. Agency belongs entirely to prakriti sphere, specifically to the buddhi or ahakara, the ego.
The ego is the agent.
Yes. The Sāṃkhya Sutras 6 Spite 5.4 explicitly state the ego is the agent, not the puru. You can think of it like a multi-layered lampshade covering a light bulb. The purua is the pure, unchanging light bulb. The buddhi, ahakara, and manas are the layers of the lampshade, constantly interacting with the external world. The buddhi, the intellect, reflects the world of change and experience to the puru.
So the puru sees the reflections.
It's aware of these reflections, yes, but remains utterly aloof from it. It's untouched.
So it experiences the results, like pleasure or pain, but doesn't do the actions.
Precisely. It makes the pura the experiencer of the results it suffers or enjoys, but never the agent of those actions. like the analogy they use, a master enjoying food cooked by another.
The master experiences the pleasure of the meal but didn't actually do the cooking.
Exactly. The profound insight here, or perhaps the challenge, is this radical separation of consciousness from action. It forces us to question, if our deep self isn't acting, then what is this I that feels responsible for everything it does?
Yeah, that really challenges our intuition.
It absolutely does. And this immediately raises a very important question, one that rival schools, particularly Nyāya, just seize upon with vigor. If the Atman is a non-agent, how do we explain intentional ethical choices? How does it determine, for example, I will perform dharma righteous action and not engage in dhamma unrighteous action? Where does that decision come from?
Right. How can an inert buddhi make a moral choice?
That's Nyāya's primary objection. It's straightforward and powerful. Assigning changeable qualities like desire, happiness, or agency to the Atman fundamentally compromises its eternality. If the soul can change, it can't be eternal.
And if it's not eternal, it can't be a stable foundation for identity or moral responsibility across lifetimes.
Precisely. That's the Nyāya critique.
But Sāṃkhya must have had a response, right?
Oh, they did. A potent retort rooted in their core axiom about eternality meaning no change. From their perspective, if qualities like agency, happiness, or distress were truly inherent in the soul, well then liberation, moksha, would be impossible.
Impossible. Why?
Because a quality can never truly be separated from its substance. If suffering is an intrinsic quality of the soul, you can never get rid of it. It's part of its nature.
Ah, okay. So if agency or suffering are built in, you're stuck with them.
Exactly. Liberation, for Sāṃkhya, is only possible if the Atman is distinct from these changeable temporal qualities. They argue that it's precisely because the Kuru is aloof and distinct from Prati that liberation, the cessation of suffering, is even conceivable.
So the non-agency is actually necessary for liberation in their view.
Correct. And this perspective seems to be supported, at least on the surface, by a famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which states, "Actions are performed by the qualities of Prati. One who is deluded by ego thinks I am the agent." 3.27.
Interesting. So the Gita seems to back them up.
Well, yes and no. The Gita is also a Vedantic text, which adds another layer of complexity to this interpretation. It's not quite so simple. But the unresolved tension here is significant. If buddhi, an unconscious material entity, is making the choices, why is one Atman associated with a worldly mind pursuing transient experiences, while another Atman finds itself tied to a mind that pursues the path to liberation? How does that differentiation happen if the Atman itself is passive?
Right. The Atman, in this scenario, seems to be bound by the choices made by a completely distinct metaphysical entity.
Exactly. And that truly is the crux of the Sāṃkhya dilemma for other schools.
Given Sāṃkhya's radical claim that the deep self is a non-agent, you can imagine how this stirred up vigorous debate.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the fiercest critics was the Nyāya school. They insisted on an entirely different foundation for agency.
So if Sāṃkhya's self was frictionless, what was Nyāya's?
Nyāya's self was undeniably hands-on. For Nyāya, the enduring individual self must be the locus of agency and moral responsibility. They actively attack Buddhist no-self theories.
Anatman, right.
Yes, Anatman. Nyāya argues that without an enduring, continuous self, the very concept of moral responsibility becomes impossible. Their logic is, if there's no continuous I over time, then I am not the same individual that I was last week, or even in a previous birth.
Which would mean you couldn't be held responsible for past actions or expect results from future ones.
Exactly. It undermines the whole system of karma and consequence.
So what is the self for Nyāya?
For Nyāya, the self, the Atman, is an eternal substance, the locus of cognition, desire, aversion, volition, pleasure, and pain. It's the central hub for all these experiences and capacities.
So all those things Sāṃkhya put in Praki, Nyāya puts them in the Atman.
Correct. They distinguish two kinds of priyatna, which we can translate as effort or volition. The first is jivana purvaka. This is subvolitional. Think of it as the involuntary effort animating our biological processes, your heart beating, blood circulating. This flows from the Atman's innate capacity to organize matter according to its karma.
Automatic bodily functions.
Right. The second, and the one they're more concerned with when discussing agency, is ichchadve purvaka. This is prayatna proper. It's distinctively associated with conscious, intelligent beings.
Intentional effort.
Yes. It's the deliberate volition that motivates intentional action, described as the cause of endeavor directed toward the acquisition of what is beneficial and the avoidance of what is not. So your heart beating is jivana-purvaka, but your decision to consciously lift your arm to drink water is ichadava-purvaka.
Got it. And how does an action unfold according to Nyāya?
For Nyāya, an intentional action follows a clear sequence. First, cognition recognizing something as worth doing. This leads to an intention, chikaya, then volition, prayatna, and finally, bodily action.
Cognition, intention, volition, action.
Exactly. And this entire chain, critically, is rooted in the individual self, making it truly the agent.
That's a very precise definition from Nyāya, but it raises a critical question for us. What does it mean for the definition of an agent itself? How do they define agent?
Udayatthagara, a prominent Nyāya philosopher, defines an agent, or kartakaraka, as one who, first, employs other direct participants, like the body or senses,
Okay.
and second, two, without being employed by another.
Without being employed by another. That sounds like the freedom part.
That is the crucial freedom requirement. A genuine agent for Nyāya isn't just a passive instrument in a causal chain. They are the initiator, the primary mover.
But what about motivations? Like desire impels you to act. Doesn't that employ you?
That's an insightful point. Udayatthagara argues that because these objectives, like the desire for coolness impelling you to jump in a stream because they operate internally as goals or reasons, they do not violate this freedom requirement.
Because they come from within you.
Exactly. They are internal drivers, part of your conscious reasoning, not external forces compelling action against your will.
So what does this all mean then, boiling it down for Nyāya?
For Nyāya, agency in its most robust sense fundamentally requires the capacity for cognition, desire, and volition. And all of these are fundamentally born by the individual Atman. At its core, agency for Nyāya is being the locus of volition, being that conscious, intentional origin point for every meaningful action.
Okay, so a very active, engaged self.
Very active. And Nyāya's critique of Sāṃkhya's frictionless self is one of their most powerful points of contention. It highlights this core difference in how they view consciousness.
Remind us of Sāṃkhya's view again briefly.
Sāṃkhya's view, the purva is never truly touched by the world. Its properties are displaced to the antakaran, the inner organ, especially the buddhi. Sāṃkhya even states, no purva is therefore ever bound, released, or the subject of transmigration. It is prapti alone, which is bound, released, and undergoes transmigration.
Right. Only matter is involved in the cycle.
Nyāya argues this is simply unsustainable, ultimately unintelligible from our lived perspective. They contend that it's impossible to truly bifurcate consciousness, which is the self, from cognition, which Sāṃkhya assigns to buddhi.
You can't separate awareness from thinking.
According to Nyāya, no. Jayanta, a Nyāya philosopher, insists that awareness involves a kind of activity, something that must be performed by the very being who is aware. If you are aware, that awareness itself is an action of the self.
So awareness isn't passive.
Not for Nyāya. They dismiss Sāṃkhya's mirror analogy where buddhi reflects the world to the purva as a false comparison. They argue that the capacity for consciousness, Siddhi Shakti, is not liable to modification and is not transferable to another.
Meaning awareness can't be borrowed or reflected.
Right. If the self is a knower in any meaningful way, it must be directly involved in the process of knowing. There has to be some cognitive friction between the self and world, some active engagement. Otherwise, the pura becomes a mere inert spectator, a passive audience to a show put on by unconscious matter. And any talk of its experience, knowing, or even suffering becomes unintelligible. The self, for Nyāya, is not just a passive conscious entity. It's an active participant, an agent, deeply involved in its own awareness and actions.
And therefore, genuinely responsible for them.
That's the Nyāya position. Very different from Sāṃkhya.
Okay, let's shift our perspective entirely now. Let's look at how grammarians approached agency. People like Pitami and his commentators, Kakyana and Patanjali. This sounds like a very different lens.
It is less about deep metaphysics, more about how we use language to describe the world. Remember that intellectual boxing match?
Yeah.
This is a great example of a different discipline weighing in.
So what did Pitini say?
For Pitini, an agent, a kartu, is simply a participant in an action that one wishes to speak of as acting independently. Svātantrya.
Wishes to speak of as acting independently.
Exactly. What's crucial here is that he doesn't define what independence means ontologically. He's not getting into the deep metaphysics of whether a soul is truly free or if consciousness is separate from matter. His concern is the structure of language.
Just how language works.
Right. And his commentators, Katyana and Patanjali, reinforce this wish to speak, or viveko, approach. They give examples that might seem counterintuitive from a purely metaphysical standpoint, but make perfect sense grammatically in everyday speech.
Like what?
You can say, the pot is cooking, stali pakati.
Even though the pot isn't sentient.
Right. Or, the riverbank is about to fall. The bank isn't consciously deciding anything. Grammatically speaking, in these sentences, the pot and the riverbank are the agents because they are presented as the independent instigators of the action within that linguistic context.
So agency is about linguistic presentation, not inherent capacity.
For the grammarians, yes. What's profoundly important here is that there is no requirement that an agent be animate, sentient, or capable of conscious effort. The determination of agency, for them, is based on the conventions of a speech community, lociki viveka.
How people conventionally talk.
Exactly. Not by an individual's arbitrary choice or some inherent property of the object itself. It's about how language is conventionally used to describe a phenomenon. It's a practical rather than a purely philosophical concern. If a community speaks of a pot cooking, then grammatically the pot is the agent. Full stop.
This grammatical perspective immediately raises an important question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It highlights a clash with the Nyāya view we just discussed.
Absolutely. Because for Nyāya, a true agent is an intelligent, sentient being capable of conscious effort.
So for Nyāya, calling a tree an agent, like in the tree stands, would be metaphorical.
Yes. A figure of speech, maybe poetic license, but not a statement about the tree's inherent conscious agency.
But for the Pachinyas, the grammarians,
it's just how the language works. A conventional and perfectly valid grammatical construction in that context.
this divergence points to a deeper philosophical difference then.
It really does. Is philosophical analysis primarily about how we talk about the world, the conventions of language? Or is it about uncovering the underlying reality of the world, independent of linguistic conventions?
Two different goals.
Two different goals. The grammarians show us that agency can be a fluid concept depending on whether your focus is descriptive language or ultimate metaphysics. It's a reminder that different disciplines ask different questions and arrive at different answers, all valid within their own frameworks.
Fascinating. Okay, let's move into how agency plays out in the path to liberation itself. What about Buddhism? This raises an important question. How does agency fit with the Buddhist emphasis on no self? And that seems contradictory.
It does seem contradictory at first glance. The core of Buddhist action theory lies in satana. This is translated as volition, intention, will, sometimes, and intending. It's considered the essential defining feature of karma. It's what distinguishes intentional actions from mere movements.
The intention behind the act.
Right. Now, in the West, the problem of free will is often framed around moral responsibility. Are we apt targets for praise or blame? Some interpreters see satana as an equivalent to free will.
Makes sense.
However, our source points out that in classical Buddhist sources, facts about moral responsibility do not always map directly onto facts about karma. Satana isn't necessarily conscious or deliberate in every single instance, and a person isn't always morally responsible for all their karma in the way Western philosophy might expect.
How so?
Well, for example, an unskillful action performed out of deep-seated habit might generate karma, even if it wasn't fully consciously willed in that moment. The responsibility link isn't always one-to-one with conscious choice.
Okay, interesting nuance. What about determinism?
Right. Causal determinism, the view that there's exactly one possible future determined by the past and causal laws. This intuitively threatens our idea of alternative possibilities, right?
Yeah, if everything's determined, where's the choice?
Exactly. In Western philosophy, incompatibilists argue either that free will exists and determinism is false, libertarians, or determinism is true and free will doesn't exist, hard determinists. Buddhists, however, generally take a different approach. Compatibilist approach.
Compatibilist, meaning free will and determinism can coexist.
Essentially, yes. For them, the relevant senses of control and choice are compatible with or even require causal determinism.
Require it. How?
Actions are considered free when they proceed from internal causes, like our reasons, volitions, desires, even if those internal causes are themselves part of a larger causal chain. The key is that they originate within the person, not from external compulsion.
So as long as I'm the source, even if my motivations are determined, it's still free.
That's the compatibilist line, generally speaking. Think of it like a river flowing. It's determined by gravity and the landscape, but it still flows freely within its banks. Our actions are determined by our internal mental states, but those states are still ours. And while the Buddhist path is fundamentally premised on the empirical fact that persons enjoy the freedom to choose one course of action over another, the preferred idiom for describing this freedom isn't always free will, it's often control.
Control.
Yes. The Pali Suttas are full of expressions like, a monk controls his mind and is not controlled by his mind. A practitioner is described as one who goes against the stream, rather than passively following the currents of craving. One who has mastered the training is said to have mastery over his mind.
So it's about actively directing the mind.
Exactly. The qualities cultivated through the path, faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, discernment, are even referred to as ruling or controlling faculties. This highlights an active, intentional cultivation of inner freedom, a disciplined redirection of mental and physical processes.
It's not about being an uncaused first cause.
No, it's about gaining mastery over the causes within oneself.
Now, to truly grasp the Buddhist approach, you mentioned we need to consider the doctrine of the two truths. This sounds crucial.
It is. This is where it gets really fascinating and can initially feel, well, counterintuitive. The Buddha, in his early discourses, speaks in what our source calls two semantic registers. Essentially two ways of understanding reality, both valid within their own spheres.
Two levels of truth.
Kind of. First, there's the conventional truth, sariti satya. This is the realm of our everyday experience. It's where we talk about persons and the freedoms they enjoy. It's where agency, choice, and control make perfect sense in our daily lives. You and I, we exist as persons, we make choices, we have agency, we feel responsible. This is our lived reality, the world of common sense.
The world as we usually experience.
Exactly. Then there's the ultimate truth, paramartha satya. From this perspective, persons, experiences, actions, they're all analyzed in terms of individual, ephemeral, mental, and physical elements called dharmas, or aggregates, stantas of these elements.
The building blocks.
The constantly changing, impersonal building blocks of existence. Now, in the Abhidharma tradition, if you analyze reality at this ultimate level, persons disappear, and there is no entity to which we might ascribe agency, choice, or control. There's no permanent, unchanging self behind the processes.
So the self dissolves under analysis.
Right. But here's the crucial nuance. This does not entail that persons do not exist or that they do not enjoy these freedoms from the perspective of conventional truth.
So both levels are valid.
Yes, it's about different levels of analysis, like describing a wave. Conventionally, we see a wave as a distinct entity. Ultimately, it's just water molecules in motion. Both descriptions are true, depending on your focus.
Okay, that analogy helps.
The Mādhyamaka school, for instance, is not reductionist. They don't say persons don't exist at all or that our actions are purely illusory. For a Mādhyamaka philosopher, as the famous text Mula Mādhyamaka states, there does not exist anything that is not dependently arisen. Therefore, there does not exist anything that is not empty.
Everything is dependently arisen, therefore empty of inherent existence.
Precisely. This means everything, including our sense of self and our agency, arises in dependence on other factors. Agency, in this view, is discussed in the realm of dependent origination, that is, the realm of conventional truth.
So agency exists conventionally as a dependent phenomenon.
Right. The person in Mādhyamaka is a conceptual imputation, a convenient designation with no reality apart from that designation. Selves are constructed through the appropriation of aggregates. They are not autonomous, independently existing entities, but rather dependently originated processes that we conventionally label as self.
So while you feel like an independent agent, from an ultimate perspective, that An is a constantly changing collection of interdependent processes.
Exactly. Yet in the conventional world, your choices matter profoundly.
This two truths framework, it leads to what you called a useful delusion, right?
Yeah.
Especially for the spiritual path.
Yes, that's a key practical implication. The Buddhist canon is full of exhortations to take responsibility for one's own liberation. Think of the Buddha's consistent message regarding the indispensability of effort.
Right, you have to make the effort.
And morally reactive attitudes like shame, the feeling of shame for one's own unskillful actions, and apprehension, apotropia, the fear of blame from others, are emphasized as the basis for virtue. These attitudes presuppose the notion of oneself as a morally responsible agent. If you didn't feel you had a choice, these feelings wouldn't make sense.
So you need that sense of self to feel responsibility.
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
So how does this fit with no self? The idea that we choose or control our actions rather than that the choice and control we enjoy are the result of impersonal dharmic processes is a useful delusion up to a point.
Useful up to a point.
Yes. Initially, this delusion of self-conscious effort helps the practitioner cultivate freedom. It sets the psychophysical process on the right course, develops wholesome habits. For example, a beginner meditator might consciously think, I will focus on my breath. That I is central.
Okay.
But gradually, as wholesome habits take hold and self-grasping loosens, there is no need for self-conscious effort. It becomes more natural.
Like muscle memory?
Kind of. It's like a master musician. When they are fully skilled, the psychophysical process flows expertly and effortlessly without a conscious eye directing every single note.
It just flows.
It just flows. And for the Buddhists, this isn't debilitating or disempowering. It is, in fact, profoundly liberating. The ultimate freedom is when actions flow spontaneously and skillfully, driven by wisdom and compassion, without the burden of a reified self trying to control them.
Letting go of the controller is the liberation.
In a sense, yes.
Wow. Okay, now let's turn to Jainism. You said it offers a starkly different, almost existential perspective.
Starkly different, yes. After the nuanced, two-tiered approach of Buddhism, Jainism delivers a powerful, direct message about will.
What's the core idea?
At its core, Jainism asserts that through acts of will vitiated by violent intent, karmas adhere to the soul. Through acts of will inspired by a desire to do no harm, karmas fly away, leaving the soul lighter and less burdened and ultimately free.
So a direct link between your will and karma sticking or falling away.
Direct, powerful, and immediate. It's a philosophy that empowers the individual entirely. The emphasis on voluntary action is paramount.
Voluntary action is key.
Absolutely. The earliest extant Jaina text, the Ākārīga Sutra from around 300 BCE, clearly espouses adherence to vows as the primary way of achieving its intended spiritual goals. It's a philosophy and way of life quite literally based on voluntary action. Every step on the path is a conscious choice.
And later texts reinforce this?
Yes. The foundational Tattvartha Sutra, accepted by both major Jaina sects, elaborates. Karma causes rebirth. Vows cleanse one of karma. Through diligent adherence to Jaina vows, one can purge karma and gain release.
Very clear cause and effect, driven entirely by individual will.
Exactly. There's no escaping the consequences, but also no limit to the potential for self-transformation through intentional effort.
And what's fascinating here, you mentioned, is how Jainism explicitly critiques other schools.
Yes, they clearly distinguish their position. Haripadra, an 8th century Jaina scholar, argued that Advaita Vedanta's illusionism, the idea that suffering is ultimately an illusion, and Buddhism's emphasis on constant change, that everything, including the self, is always changing, that these views fall short of the mark because of their reluctance to take the pains of the world sufficiently seriously.
They felt others weren't taking suffering seriously enough.
That's the Jaina critique. For Jainas, the suffering and joy of the world, the entire cycle of rebirth, are very real experiences for a very real soul. And the reality of soul and matter cannot be denied. If misery were merely an illusion, there'd be no genuine incentive for the rigorous spiritual purification and self-discipline that Jainism demands.
It underscores their commitment to the tangible reality of our experiences.
And the direct, profound impact of our actions.
So what does this all mean for divine intervention or the role of a god?
In Jainism, the question of divine will does not arise.
It doesn't rise at all.
No. This is a truly distinct and radical feature compared to many other Indian traditions. Liberated teachers, the Tirthakāras, the ford makers across the ocean of existence, they're revered as examples, models, ideals.
They're showing the way.
Showing the way, yes. Proving that reaching that state is possible. However, these enlightened beings hold no power over those who remain mired in the cycle of life and death and rebirth.
No god pulling strings, granting grace, intervening.
None. It's a purely thorough, voluntarist outlook. It places the entire burden and the entire potential for liberation firmly and solely on the individual's actions, intentions, and unwavering will.
You are entirely responsible for your own destiny.
100%.
And this profound voluntarism, it must translate directly into their spiritual practice. Directly and powerfully. Effort yoga is known as the highest yoga in Jainism. Liberation, for them, occurs only through assiduous adherence to the purifying vows.
It's all about the effort and the vows.
Right. Impure actions, they explain, are self-generated through mental states like raga, attraction, Dve, repulsion, and moha, delusion. These lead to a fixed sense of ego and attachment to a false identity. Abandoning this ego, meticulously purifying these mental states, that's the key.
Purifying the intentions.
Exactly. Kunda, an influential Digambara Jaina philosopher, states that right knowledge and right action purify the soul. He even takes it a step further, implying that ultimately, even attachment to their rightness must be renounced.
Letting go even of attachment to the path itself.
As part of the path to ultimate freedom, the journey is one of conscious, continuous effort to refine one's will.
This focus on will reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the Mīmāṃsā school. Ah, yes. There's a fascinating parallel there, particularly regarding Vedic commands. Mīmāṃsā is another Vedic tradition, primarily focused on correctly performing Vedic rituals and understanding the authority of the Vedas.
Right, the ritual experts.
Exactly. For Mīmāṃsā, when you encounter a Vedic command like a ritual prescription, there's a unique interpretation of agency. They argue, the Vedic injunction tells one what to do, it does not tell one that one has to do it.
Wait, the command doesn't compel you to obey?
Not directly. The burden of choosing to do or not to do what has been prescribed remains entirely on the addressee. There's still a genuine choice, a space for individual will, even when facing divine injunctions.
So even Vedic commands don't override free will for Mīmāṃsā.
Not entirely. The key to their non-determinism lies in the belief that one can influence one's likes and dislikes. Desire, for Mīmāṃsā, is part of one's rational behavior and not outside it. You can work on your desire.
You can train your desires.
Yes. So while karma inclines one toward doing something, but does not completely determine one to do it, it sets up tendencies, but you retain the ultimate power to choose. Theoretically, it's even possible to extirpate one's desires, leading to an abstract freedom from all commands.
Complete freedom from desire.
Later Mīmāṃsākars might interpret this ideal state differently, perhaps as dedicating all actions to God, shifting the motivation, but still preserving that voluntaristic core, the idea that a conscious, intentional choice is always involved.
Okay, that's a really interesting take on balancing scripture and will. Now, let's turn to Advaita Vedānta, a hugely influential school. You mentioned it introduces a two-tiered reality again.
Yes, similar to Buddhism in having two levels, but with very different content and implications. Sāṃkhya, its most famous proponent, adopts a model describing reality in two distinct tiers, which is absolutely crucial for understanding his nuanced position on free will and agency.
Okay, what are the two tiers in Advaita?
The first is absolute reality, paramarthika. From this ultimate viewpoint, the self is Brahman, the one supreme reality, and this Brahman is devoid of agency.
Devoid of agency, so like Sāṃkhya's Peru in that sense.
Similar in being non-agentic, yes, but radically different because here the self is the sole reality, not just consciousness separate from matter. In this absolute sense, Sāṃkhya maintains there's no origination as such to ground the theory of cause and effect.
No real cause and effect.
Not ultimately. The entire phenomenal world, all actions, agents, events, is considered a grand misconception, a product of Maya or Avidya, illusion or ignorance.
The world is an illusion.
From the absolute standpoint, yes. And the key insight for Advaita here is this paradox. If the self is static, changeless, and devoid of action, then no action can truly reveal or affect its intrinsic nature.
Actions can't touch the real self?
Correct. Therefore, liberation in Advaita Vedanta is attained solely through wisdom jhana, the direct, immediate realization that you are, that tattvam asi, meaning your true self, is identical with Brahman. It's not attained through actions, rituals, or any form of doing.
It's a realization, an awakening, not an accomplishment.
Exactly. It's about removing ignorance, not achieving something new.
But we live in the world, we act, we experience consequences. How does Sāṃkhya account for that?
Right. Sāṃkhya is a very practical philosopher. He also offers a conventional reality, vyavaharika. This provides a coherent picture of the world as we experience it in our daily lives.
The everyday world.
Yes. And here he offers a compromise between free will and a mild determinism that is based on the karmic residue of an agent's previous actions that were affected with his own free will.
So conventionally, we do have free will and karma operates.
Yes. In our everyday lives, agency is very real, we make choices, and karma plays a significant role in shaping our experiences and tendencies. We are held accountable for our actions. But this conventional reality, with all its actions and consequences, is always understood within the context of the ultimate non-dual truth where no real distinctions exist. It's real, but not ultimately real.
Okay, so there's the absolute view, no agency, and the conventional view, agency plus karma. How does he explain causality conventionally? If Brahman is non-active, how does anything arise?
That's the challenge. Shukara posits that Brahman is the metaphysical source or ground of all causal relations. It's the underlying reality that makes all apparent causality possible. Since the individual self is ultimately Brahman, this means the self, in its ultimate nature, is autonomous in giving rise to the world of common sense experience through its power of Maya.
Through illusion.
Through its power to project illusion. The challenge then arises, how can an insentient world originate from a sentient Brahman?
Right, how does consciousness produce matter?
Akara responds with a simple analogy. Just as insentient effects such as hair or nails originate out of persons established as sentient, so too can the world originate from Brahman, because both share the fundamental constituent of being. It's not about an active creation in the usual sense, but a manifestation, an appearance.
Okay, so what's Sakara's final position on agency then?
He ultimately rejects the paradigm of agent and action when postulating the absolute viewpoint. From the highest perspective, there is no separate agent and no separate action. Conventionally, he acknowledges agency. He critiques the Sāṃkhya idea that a cognitive faculty, buddhi, can be the agent, arguing that buddhi lacks true deliberation and isn't the fundamental conscious entity. For him, the self is the agent, but only conventionally because of its connection with consciousness and its perception of the results of action.
It's the connection to consciousness that makes it seem like the agent.
Yes, and his prominent follower, Sureshvara, takes this even further. He states unequivocally that liberation is only the removal of ignorance. Action cannot be an instrument. It's instantaneous. Like realizing a rope you mistook for a snake is just a rope, no action is needed to dispel a false perception. Actions, for Sureshvara, simply cannot grant liberation. Only direct knowledge can.
So action is irrelevant for liberation in this view?
For the ultimate goal, yes. It might purify the mind conventionally, make it ready for knowledge, but it doesn't directly cause liberation.
And you mentioned variations within Advaita.
Right, it's worth noting the tradition isn't monolithic. Some differentiate between Mayavada, where God, Ajvada, is seen as the cosmic agent of creation and destruction, operating within the conventional realm.
God as the conventional creator.
And Avidyavada, where the individual jiva self is understood as the agent primarily of its own personal world of experience, projecting its own ignorance.
So is it God creating the illusion or the individual?
Different strands emphasize different aspects. Some Advaitins even consider Ishvara as the single phenomenal self, with individual agency maintained by the Antakaran mind, leading to a more radical subjective idealism, where our world is effectively a collective dream projected by one mind.
Wow, that's quite a spectrum even within one school.
It shows the depth of debate on how to reconcile the absolute and conventional truths.
Okay, moving beyond Advaita then. You mentioned a school that sees agency very differently, not as a limitation, but as a divine power. Kashmiri Saivism.
Yes, non-dual Kashmiri Saivism, a very different flavor. Its core tenet is that all reality is ultimately non-dual consciousness, the unity of Shiva and Sakti, the absolute, and its creative power.
One reality. Conscious power.
Exactly. Think of it as the ultimate all-encompassing I from which everything else emanates. This is a very different starting point from the Sāṃkhya dualism we discussed earlier.
Right. No separation between consciousness and power matter here.
None. Within this tradition, philosophers like Utpaladeva and Abhinavagupta developed the Pratyabhijna system. Pratyabhijna means self-recognition.
Self-recognition.
Yes. Here, Siva Sakti, his divine power, doesn't just create the universe once. It emanates and controls the entire cosmos through an act of constant self-recognition, pratyabhijna or ahampratyavimarsha. It's the Lord recognizing himself as the entire universe, an unfolding of divine awareness.
So the universe is God's act of self-recognition.
In essence, yes. This implies that the universe is Siva's agency, a continuous act of self-manifestation.
Now, how does this connect back to the idea of an agent, the Kartu from the Grammarians you mentioned earlier? The independent actor.
Ah, great connection. Kashmiri Saivism offers a profound cosmological reinterpretation of that grammatical concept. Remember the Grammarians' Karaka system, where the agent, Kartu, was the independent one, the primary instigator?
Yes, the svātantrya, the independent one.
The Saivas take this grammatical concept and apply it directly to the divine. The Lord Self's unlimited cosmogonic and cosmocratic power comes from his mere intention, icha, and agential autonomy, svātantrya. His independence is his power to create.
So God's intention is the ultimate independent action.
Exactly. Abhinavagupta uses a powerful analogy. Just as the intention "I cook" manifests as various movements, putting something on the fire, stirring, chopping, so too, action is really nothing but the Supreme Lord's intention. The Lord's recognitive apprehension, his thought "I Lord, I appear, I manifest," is his self-revelation through the entire universe. His very being is an act of creation and agency.
And our agency.
Our individual agency is ultimately a reflection, perhaps a limited expression, of that divine power.
So the path is about realizing that connection.
Precisely. Kashmiri Saiism maps out a spiritual path where the goal is to transform one's limited individual agency into that omnipotent divine agency. It's done through a process of realizing one's true nature, recognizing oneself as Siva.
How does that happen?
It involves shedding taints, mala, that veil this inherent divine power within us, preventing us from recognizing our true expansive self.
Taints, like impurities.
Kind of. The first is akamala. This represents limited individuality. It's described as a degradation of one or both of Siva's intertwined epistemological and agential active capacities. Essentially, a loss of the agential autonomy of consciousness that leads us to feel separate and constrained.
The feeling of being small and separate.
Right. The second is karma mala, the taint of karma. This is seen as a delimitation of agency, which directly pulls the individual into the nexus of action and results, binding us through past deeds.
So karma limits our divine agency.
Yes. And freedom from karma, conversely, is not about the self being non-agentic, like in Sāṃkhya or Advaita's ultimate view, but about realizing one's omnipotent action shakti, the divine power that is truly ours, inherent in our nature as Siva.
So liberation is reclaiming that divine power.
Reclaiming and recognizing it. The ultimate goal for the practitioner is to recognize that the prima facie limited, I realize my true first-person agency to be that of Siva, the omnipotent possessor of Sakti.
It's a journey from a constrained sense of doing to a boundless divine being and becoming.
Beautifully put. Recognizing your deepest self as the ultimate agent of reality.
Okay, that's a powerful vision. Now let's move to a distinct dualist perspective again, but different from Sāṃkhya. Madhva.
Yes, Madhva. His school, Advaita Vedānta, asserts a clear separation between God, known, and finite selves, but also, crucially, a profound dependence of the selves on God.
Separation and dependence. How does that work?
Madhva's position is quite distinctive within Indian philosophy. Unlike Sāṃkhya, Buddhism, or Advaita's ultimate view, Madhva strongly affirms the self's agency. For him, the individual self is indeed an agent, capable of choice and action.
So the self acts.
Yes. But here comes the core tension. How does the self's genuine agency coexist with its absolute dependence on God?
The central problem for him.
Right. For Madhva, God is established as the true, ultimate agent of creation, maintenance, and destruction of the entire world. While individual agency is acknowledged, Madhva interprets it as fundamentally dependent on God.
Dependent how?
Scriptural statements like, one attains the result of the action one performs, clearly indicate individual agency and responsibility. Madhva accepts this. Yet for him, God is the inner controller, Antaraman, who activates the finite self's will.
God activates our will.
In a sense. So God's grace leads to action, meaning God provides the ultimate sanction and power for any action to occur. The finite self acts as an agent under God's control.
So I choose, but God enables the choice.
That's a good way to think about it. Your will to act is real, you truly choose, but it is ultimately sanctioned and enabled by the divine. It's a subtle but crucial distinction-dependent agency.
This brings us to where Madhva truly distinguishes himself, doesn't it? With his unique doctrine of Taratamya.
Yes, Taratamya, the hierarchy of souls. This asserts that all finite selves are inherently distinct and fixed in an eternal hierarchy.
Fixed, meaning unchanging.
Yes. Each self has a fixed fitness, yogata, or what you might call an inherent unchangeable nature or destiny that determines its ultimate spiritual trajectory. And this isn't based primarily on what you do, but on what you intrinsically are.
What are these fixed categories?
Madhva categorizes selves into distinct eternal groups. Eternally liberated, Nityamukta, those who have always been free, never bound.
Okay.
Then, fit for liberation, Bhakti-yogya, those whose inherent nature will eventually lead them to achieve liberation through proper devotion.
The potential saints.
Then, fit for cyclical existence, Nityasasan, those whose nature means they will perpetually cycle through rebirth, never achieving liberation, but also never falling into utter darkness. They just keep going round.
Stuck in the cycle.
And finally, fit for darkness, Tama Yoga, those whose inherent nature destines them for eternal damnation or suffering.
Wow, that's strong stuff. Eternal damnation based on inherent nature.
It is, and crucially, this means only some selves can ever be liberated. It's a very strong form of determinism, rooted not in external forces or even past karma alone, though karma plays a role within the nature, but in an inherent fixed nature of each individual self.
That really challenges our intuitive sense of universal potential for salvation, doesn't it?
Deeply.
How did Madhva reconcile this with the idea of a good God, the theodicy problem?
This hierarchical determinism is Madhva's distinctive solution to the problem of theodicy, why suffering and evil exist in a world created by an all-good, all-powerful God. Madhva argues that God is not responsible for evil because karma is beginningless, and critically, selves have fixed nature.
So God didn't create the bad natures?
No, God doesn't create new karma or new natures. Rather, God justly grants results based on this beginningless karma and the inherent eternal nature of each self. God is perfectly just in dispensing outcomes according to these pre-existing fixed categories of souls.
So God is just administering an existing system based on inherent natures.
Exactly. This means God is off the hook for the existence of suffering or the varied, often harsh destinies of souls, as he is simply maintaining a pre-established, eternal order based on the soul's own intrinsic fitness.
It's a bold and distinctive approach, grounding responsibility firmly in the eternal nature of the individual.
Very much so.
Okay. Finally, let's explore Gokya Vaitamism, a devotional bhakti tradition. He said this brings agency back into the self in a powerful way.
Yes, but within a relationship of eternal loving dependence on God. Very different from Madhva's fixed hierarchy, though still emphasizing dependence.
How so?
This affirmation of the self's agency is absolutely crucial for this tradition. For scriptural injunctions to cultivate devotion like hearing and reciting God's names, serving the divine, for these to be meaningful and actually lead to spiritual results, there must be agency in the self, the Atman.
Otherwise, the path of devotion makes no sense.
Exactly. Without genuine agency, the entire path of bhakti, which relies on individual choice and effort in devotion, would lose its efficacy and purpose. Baladeva Vidyawina, a prominent Advaita theologian, explicitly states, "The self alone is the agent, not the qualities of matter," arguing that scripture would be meaningless otherwise.
So, rejecting the Sāṃkhya view clearly.
Very clearly. And Jiva Gosvamin, another central figure, further emphasizes that agency is a real, inherent, and eternal feature of the self. It's not just a superficial byproduct of the self's interaction with the material mind-body complex. It's intrinsic to who we are as souls.
Inherent and eternal agency. Okay. What about embodiment? Does the self need a body to act?
On this point, Gacchayavakavas agree with the Nyāya school. The self needs a body of some sort, whether material or spiritual, to express its latent powers of agency, cognition, volition, and apprehension. The body serves as a vehicle for action and experience.
Allowing the self's capacities to manifest.
Right. But here's their distinctive and really compelling point. Even after liberation, in the spiritual world, there must be a real and permanent perfected body, Siva Rupa, existing in the spiritual world through which the self eternally expresses its latent powers of agency.
A spiritual body even after liberation. Why?
This ensures that even in liberation, the self maintains a real, active, and eternal relationship of service and devotion with the Lord, Gaudiya in their tradition. It doesn't just dissolve into an undifferentiated, inactive state of consciousness, as some other schools might propose. Liberation is an active, loving relationship.
So liberation isn't merging, but perfected relationship.
Exactly. Active relational liberation.
So what does this all mean when we compare Gacchayavaitava to Advaita Vedānta, particularly on the concept of jnana, knowledge, or awareness? You said there were stark differences.
Very stark. For Advaita, as we discussed, jhana is often understood as awareness only, pure consciousness without specific content. The self is the locus of this pure awareness, like a blank screen.
Undifferentiated consciousness.
Right. Gacchayavakavas, however, hold a very different view. For them, jhana refers to a subject and has content. The self is not just the locus of consciousness, but fundamentally the locus of knowing, the experiencer of specific things, a consciousness that actively engages with its objects, its awareness of something.
So consciousness always has an object, a content.
Yes, and a subject who is the knower. Jiva Goswami makes a compelling argument for this inherent active nature of the self by appealing to our common experience of deep sleep.
Deep sleep. How does that show anything?
He says, because of reflecting, I slept well immediately after deep sleep. It is understood that even in that deep sleep, there is an inherent ability for apprehension, an inherent feeling of happiness, and an inherent sense of I.
Because we remember feeling good and being there, even without the usual mental activity.
Precisely. This implies, for Jiva, a spiritual ego, intrinsic to the self, an inherent sense of selfhood and experience that is active even when the material ego, the ahakara of Sāṃkhya perhaps, is idle. So for Gātvikāva, the self is the original source of agency, and it infuses its agency into matter, giving rise to our active engagement with the world.
This is why their devotional practices hold such significance, because the self truly is capable of willing action towards God.
Absolutely. But this inherent agency, crucially, is not absolute independence. What about that Gita verse again, 3.27? Actions are performed by the qualities of prakai. One who is deluded by ego thinks, I am the agent. How do they handle that?
Good question. If the self is the agent, what does that verse mean?
Baladeva Vidyamha, the Gotshya commentator, interprets this not as a rejection of the self's agency altogether. Instead, he sees it as addressing the ignorant state, where the self wrongly believes it is the independent initiator of activities, operating without considering divine sanction or material influence.
So the delusion is thinking you're independently the agent.
Exactly. He clarifies that the self is the agent. It truly makes choices, but its agency is affected only by the three, i.e. the body, the senses, and the deities of the senses, and by the immanent Lord, who is the instigator of everything, but not simply by the jiva alone.
So agency is real, but requires the body, senses, and God's sanction.
Right. The self is the agent under the control of the causative agent. The Lord is the causative agent simpliciter, giving the ultimate sanction for action, and he is unbounded by time, karma, and other constraining factors.
God enables, the self chooses and acts within that enablement.
That's the idea. And past karma and latent impressions also act as constraints on our freedom. They create tendencies towards particular actions that are often very difficult to control. Thus, one's freedom is hampered.
So freedom isn't absolute, it's constrained by karma and dependence on God.
Yes. This understanding is deeply rooted in the broader Vedantic idea that there is one independent absolute reality, Brahman or Bhagavan in this case, and everything else emanates from and is dependent upon it.
So, the final takeaway from Vaishnavaitvism.
The self has real and inherent powers of knowledge and agency. These powers are actualized through bodies, whether material or spiritual. And ultimately, in the liberated state, they are internalized, or more accurately, fully utilized for divine service, fostering an eternal, active, and loving relationship with the Supreme Lord.
It's a vision where agency isn't eliminated or seen as illusion, but perfected and directed in devotion.
Exactly. Perfected in relationship.
Wow. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, and for our understanding of that fundamental human feeling of I choose, I act? We've journeyed through an incredibly rich, really diverse philosophical landscape today.
Absolutely incredible breadth.
From Sāṃkhya's notion of a non-agent self, just a witness to matter's actions, to Jainism's radical voluntarism, where individual will is everything, the sole determinant of your karmic fate.
The Nyāya's insistence on the enduring self as the fundamental locus of effort, of volition, of moral responsibility.
And how the Grammarians offered that fascinating, more linguistic, conventional understanding of agency, showing us how we talk about action matters.
Then Buddhism's subtle two-truths model that no self-ultimate reality coexisting with a conventional truth of personal control, and that useful delusion of responsibility that leads, hopefully, to an effortless flow of skillful action.
We move to Advaita Vedānta's absolute non-agency in the ultimate sense, but tempered by that conventional, compromised view of free will within the world of Maya.
Kashmiri Saivism presenting agency not as a problem, but as a divine, omnipotent power to be realized through self-recognition, transforming limited individuality back into Siva's autonomy.
Mādhyamaka offered that deeply hierarchical determinism where your fate is fixed by the inherent eternal nature of your individual self, though you still act dependently within that nature.
And finally, Gātvikāva brought agency firmly back to the self, affirming its inherent capacity for action and knowing, but framing it within a framework of eternal devotional dependence on a sanctioning divine will.
The common thread, Woven through all these wildly different metaphysical frameworks seems to be this profound, enduring inquiry into human experience, into action, into responsibility.
Even when the answers are radically different, the questions resonate.
They really do. This raises an important question, perhaps, for you, the listener, to continue mulling over long after this deep dive concludes.
What's that?
Considering these diverse views, maybe the most profound lesson isn't to settle on one definitive answer to free will or agency. Maybe it's to appreciate the multi-layered nature of reality and our experience within it.
That's a powerful thought.
If our agency is, in some sense, given to us, whether by God's sanction or Prakrutis mechanisms or the flow of dharmas, or if our self is constructed by language and narratives, or even eternally fixed by some divine plan, how does that transform our understanding of responsibility, of effort, of the very possibility of liberation?
Yeah, what does it truly mean to be an I that acts if that I is not as simple, not as independent as it often feels in our everyday moments?
It really challenges us to look deeper, doesn't it? Into the very nature of our choices, our actions, ourselves.
It certainly does. Plenty to think about.
We hope this deep dive has given you plenty to mull over and perhaps sparked some new questions for your own journey of discovery.
Keep asking those questions.
Until next time. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deep into the fascinating ideas that shape our understanding of existence.